Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. I'll ask that we put a slide up here, and we know that America leads the way in innovation. But this is changing. Just look at the following graph. We see that China exponentially increasing their R&D investments, and this effect is multiplied by what they steal from us. Not only are they advancing that, but they're stealing an amazing amount from us and from others around the world. In order to maintain this edge over the Chinese, U.S. has to leverage both public and private investment. We cannot do this by a single source by itself. And I'm very honored today to introduce the bill with my colleague, Congressman Khanna, to authorize the Office of Strategic Capital within the Department of Defense to help the U.S. military do just that, to use every resource across the enterprise to have an all-hands-on-deck mentality with this. Mr. Wolf, we know that the U.S. has to better leverage private capital for national security purposes. And as you said, we need to say no to U.S. investment in Chinese companies, period. And we know that we have to move that investment away. So the question is how do we do that? In considering U.S. national security interest, do we do that through a command and control approach? Do we say, hey, we're going to put regulations in place to say, no, you can't do these things, here are the guardrails? Or do we put in incentives or disincentives within a free market to do that? Give me your perspective, because you have looked at this and studied this in depth. I'd love to get your perspective from the general statement that you made to the specifics of how do we accomplish that?
Well, I'd say two ways. From the investment community, it really starts with a sense of moral admonishment, and I think that's something that the committee's work is doing that's important, which basically decouples the idea of profit over principle. And so you can't make business decisions if there isn't a moral component to that, and I think that is just good for business. So that's number one. People looking and saying, what are the implications of what we develop? Are we reducing human suffering? Are we developing a technology that we're going to put in an adversary's hands that's going to come back and cause us harm? The chart that you show, I think, is a really important chart, because what it tells me is we have to do more. We have to invest more in R&D, more in long-term science. What I see China doing is exactly what we did for many decades, which was have superior advantaged science and scientists here who are developing the foundational base upon which private market and investors like us can come in and commercialize those technologies. That prior chart with 35 key technologies, 25 of them from the U.S., 35 of them should be from the U.S.
So if we stop that investment into China, make sure it's not going to support Chinese technology and innovation. On the other side, though, in order to multiply that effect, we have to do everything we can to encourage not just public investment, but private investment, and do that at the pace of relevance. Give me your perspective of what we can do, not only to stop the investment, to really, whether it's through other means or through a regulatory means to stop the investment in China. What do we do to do more to encourage, through our mechanisms of free market, private investments, venture capital, private equity into U.S. innovation and technology?
So if you think about the flow of capital as basically seizing and growing these technologies on the defensive side, I think anything that we can do to slow or thwart, we won't ultimately be able to completely eradicate China's ability to get many of these technologies, but you'll be able in the time dimension to slow it. On the offensive side, it is much more of us continuing to grow that base of science so that those critical technology and that list continues to grow very aggressively. On the private side, appeal to human interest. Private markets respond when there is great opportunity. We are patriots and we want to see this country be the very best country that it can be. We also want to make great profits for our investors. And so we're drawn towards investing in cutting-edge technology and emerging technologies and defense technologies because we think it's a great business. More and more investors will follow and see that. More and more large companies will see that. And I think if the government supports that as well. You mentioned the Office of Strategic Capital. I've spent time with them. I know that they're just getting up, and there's probably a lot of lessons that they're going to figure out along the way. We're really supportive of participating and getting involved in that. The idea of a nominally unattractive investment that might become more attractive because there might be leverage that's available from the government. The government wins in advancing a domestic technology, an investor wins because they're getting better returns, the company wins because they're getting capital that they might not be, and the nation wins because we're getting an advantage that the CCP won't have.
Yeah. Mr. Ivanino, you talked a lot about how do we protect from a national security, even a homeland security standpoint, critical technologies. Give me your perspective on what we do to protect where we need to be as a nation in artificial intelligence and quantum computing, because much of what's happening right there is technology that is spawned here, but we have to protect against Chinese theft and exploitation.
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. I think it's a combination of awareness of that, and as my colleagues have both mentioned, Ms. Gorman's talked about the top 35 companies, technologies. Well, first of all, we have to be aware of those, and there has to be direct conversation with the CEOs and the boards of directors of those companies, so they're aware that China's coming for their technology. And then we should hold them accountable to protect those technologies. There should be some due diligence on their efforts from the supply chain, and also some due diligence on their perspective of what they're doing to secure, from a cyber perspective, insider threat, and hybrid technologies to prevent the Chinese from coming in.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.